It's not over 20 minutes. मैं सबको नहीं दूँगा ब्लैक में देख अभी भी देखता हूँ यार इसका बड़ा हो गया जितना भी देखता हूँ इसके ऊपर हम कुछ या नहीं करता है तो मुझे ना तो बाहर भी करके बाहर का मैं फोन पे भी बाहर नहीं करता देख सकते यार ब्रांड में चुका ना नहीं है जो बहुत एक समाज को दे लेकिन मैं करता हूँ कि कंट्रोल ना इसलिए मेरा से पूछो पड़े क्या हो अच्छी तरह या मैं जिसको बजट की बजट कितना हो रहा है तो वो लॉजिक वो वैसे वो मैं नहीं देखता उसमें तो रोस्ट होता है लेकिन इसमें रोस्ट नहीं और मैं नहीं बट सुनता चारों तरफ से ऐसे देखते क्या हो गया उसमें लॉजिक उस पीछे घुस जाएंगे सारे पढ़ने वाले कंप्लीट क्रिएट करते जो लेटेस्ट क्या बनता है वो करेंगे पिछले क्लास जैसे कि पिछले सेंस की भी एक ही चीज था आईसीसी का
Good evening. Now, why the population is so less? Every time the other school is having exam over. So now what? Both the people are not there, and the other. You all are from 7th day, no? All of you, no? You two are from Sadhavas. Why is it my birthday celebration that you all are coming at your wish? What is the lecture time? What is the lecture time? 6:30. We are supposed to be having 5 minutes before. Which chapter we were doing? I think we had already finished with photosynthesis, no? Photosynthesis we are done. In that sequence, all the chapters are done. Photosynthesis, absorption, and transpiration, all are done. Genetics is done here. So, which chapter you want to start with? Chemical coordination. That chapter is 1 now. Boulder is absent and is school is absent. Some are absent. Okay. Check out your book. Let's see what are the questions there. Coordination is about the foremost chapter. Let's start with chemical coordination. You all are using the same book. So Sadhu Baswani different book?
No, same.
It's the same book here, no? You all are using Selena. Your book is different. Yours is different. Okay. So I'll take from Selena first, and then whatever extra we'll discuss. Okay. Chemical coordination. Now this chapter is less of understanding. Actually, there is not too much of understanding. I'll explain you only the detail. Some of the details of the processes. Other than that, there is no concept as such like other chapters that you have to understand here. But this chapter is more of remembering the points, functions. No, for every particular hormone, the type of the functions. All these things you have to remember. Let's see how you should study this chapter. So first is we talk about chemical coordination. Now, what is the meaning of chemical coordination? Why are we talking about chemical coordination? First of all, when we are talking about the concept of coordination, what is coordination? Coordination here means we are talking about how does an organism respond to the changes in the environment? How does an organism respond to various different type of factors? So now when I talk about an animal, that's quite easy to understand because now say suppose now that I'm talking, you all are looking at me, you all are able to get some stimulus, I should say, some stimulus. Now my voice is acting as a stimulus, or my brain is acting, my presence here is acting as a stimulus. So if I ask you to take out this book, you do it accordingly. So what is happening between you and me? There is a coordination that is happening. And what type of coordination are we going to name this as? This would be basically nervous coordination for us, where I say something, or if I'm now asking you something, you respond in the form of an answer. Which type of system or cells are actually helping us do this? Our neurons. The nervous system is actually helping us do this. From time to time, as you say something, I respond, and I say something, you respond. Nervous coordination. But if I say the same, now I say a joke in front of the tree. Is the tree going to laugh? Of course not. Now, if I talk about, hello, how are you, my dear tree? No response. No. So now that I talk about all these things, now in this reference, if I'm talking to the tree, of course the tree does not respond. But does the tree ever respond? Does a plant ever respond? Does it ever respond? Of course, it may not respond to my sad stories that I tell the plant, or very exciting jokes that I say. Nothing. But my question is, does the plant ever respond either? तुमने देखा कभी प्लांट को हंसते हुए रोते हुए? नहीं देखा. Then how are you seeing that the plant responds? What does the plant respond?
The leaves sometimes wilt open.
The leaves sometimes wilt and open. The leaves sometimes wilt and open. No, that is not exactly okay. To some extent, I will say that is response to certain type of physical factor, temperature. Okay. Or kya? How does a plant respond? How does a plant respond? Can you give me a simple example to show or to say that yes, the plant also responds, but the methods and the mechanism, of course, are different than we are. Of course, it should be different because we are the complete group of organisms. But now that I'm talking about a plant, I touch a plant. So suppose I'm talking about the touch-me-not plant. I touch a plant. The plant closes, the leaves of the plant closes down, and after some time again opens up. So now this closing and opening is completely based on the movement of the water molecules from one region to another. And now that you touch the plant, the movement of the water molecule is triggered. Otherwise, the movement of the water molecule was not happening. So now that you have been touching it, or the lashing of the tail of the animals hit those plants, the plants start closing up, and after some time again open up. So the tail touching it, the birds touching it, we touching it is actually acting as a stimulus, and the water molecules, which were all stationary, stagnant in the cells of the plant, they started their movement. Can you give me any other example to say that how the plant is responding this way? Or yeah. So just now I was talking about the touch-me-not plant, the mimosa touch-me-not plant. No? Can you give me any other example to justify that how plant does move this way? I talk about the potted plant that we have on our window sill. The potted plant that we have in our window sill, you also must have noticed that the plants are actually growing outwards. Do the leaves and the stem and those come inside your room? No, they are all growing outside, not towards the grill. But did you ever try, or if you try also once, just change the position of the flower tub, let the leaves fall inside your room. So now that the money plant that I have in my windowsill, what do is I keep turning the tub, and then I put all the leaves towards my room. Will it remain like this for the next 3 weeks, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days? It will remain maybe roughly for a period of a day or two, but in that period, if it's bright sunny day, normal conditions, it will start moving again towards the, never mind the tub cannot move, obviously, no? The tub is remaining the same, but then the stem of the plants, which I have put it towards my room, now it has started bending down the side again. So in a week time, again I will see the stem and the leaves which I have put towards my room, again they have started moving outside. So what are they responding to? Sunlight. The plants do respond to sunlight. Now can you give me one or more examples? To what else does the plant respond to? What else does the plant respond to? Now I talk about a plant. I talk about a seed. The seed is on the soil. The seed is getting the water and the moisture and the oxygen and everything. The seed starts the process of growth. What is that called? Growth of the seed, what is it called? Germination. So seed growth ke saath saath two types of tissues does get developed from the seed. What are those two tissues called? Two specialized tissues, two outgrowths that take place from the seed when the seed has started the process of growth. What is that called? What is that called? Two special. Very good. Radicle and preview. So radicle and the preview, does it have a definite pattern of growth? Definite pattern of growth hota hai. Matlab, will the radicle and preview start growing in the same direction or in opposite direction? Kaise hota hai? The radicle, which side it is growing? Which way it starts its growth? Downwards. And the preview starts growing upwards. So now the radicle is responding to what you feel. The radicle is responding to water. Water. The radicle is growing towards water, and the preview is growing away from water, towards sunlight, away from water. So, these are सारे examples that I'm giving you. There are quite a number of them to understand. So, this way the plants do respond to variety of factors, sunlight, or I say light, I say gravity. Gravity is also something that the plant responds to. And then what else? Temperature, moisture, all these. But then now the question is, but then the plants don't have specialized, or does the plant have any specialized tissues like us? Now that I said that the nervous system that we have the neurons, the nervous system, which helps us in coordination. Does the plant also have something like specialized tissues hota hai plant ke paas to bring about this type of responses? Ki radicle ko niche ki taraf hi grow hona hai towards the water, and the preview has to grow above. And if you touch the mimosa, it should close down, and after some time. So ye sare jo activities or ye sare changes or responses dikhane ke liye, does the plant have a specialized tissue? Does the plant have a specialized tissue? Did you ever study that the plant has a specialized tissue to bring about coordination? तो नहीं पढ़ा मतलब नहीं होगा, है ना? अगर होता तो अब तक तो कुछ तो पढ़ते. So now that I talk about, the plants don't have any such tissues like this. The plants don't have. तो अगर plant के पास ऐसे specialized कोई tissues ही नहीं है to bring about the process of coordination, then how does the plant show all these different type of responses? By the way of chemicals, by the way of special chemicals. And they show the coordination. They show coordination, and they can show responses. They bring about coordination with the external environment, but the coordination with the external environment is not because of specialized tissues that they have, like animals, but it is by the way of the chemicals. It is by the way of the chemicals. So that's the reason we are talking about. In case of plants, the coordination is by the way of chemicals. In case of plants, the coordination is by the way of chemicals, and hence the name of the chapter, chemical coordination. That is what we are going to talk about. Chemical coordination. आया समझ में? So we are talking about chemical coordination. Now let us start the basic concept of this chapter. So chemical coordination, when we are talking about the basic introduction that we have understood, so you have to understand why does the plant respond and how does the plant respond. So that's the first part of the chapter. Now, when we are talking about the special chemicals, now I said the special chemicals. What are those special chemicals that we are going to study? The special chemicals that the plants have, which allow them to bring about coordination. What are those special chemicals called? They are called phytohormones. What are phytohormones? What are you going to write? What are phytohormones? Phytohormones are specialized chemical substances released by different type of plant tissues to bring about the process of coordination. To bring about the processes of coordination. So next is where now we try to understand that where are these type of chemical substances formed? These type of chemical substances are formed in certain type of plant cells, and they will be transported also from one region to another. They may be transported from one region, from one part of the plant to the other, and bring about different type of responses. So let us move on to the main part of the chapter now. That when we are looking into okay, what are they sensitive to? So now we are talking about phytohormones. Write down the definition of this word first. What are phytohormones? Let us write down this. This is a very important term. What are phytohormones? Let us write down this definition. What are phytohormones? Phytohormones, under that you write special chemical substances. Special chemical substances. Special chemical substances released by the plant tissues. Special chemical substances released by the plant tissues to bring about responses against changes in their environment, and coordination. So now, when we are talking about this, here, first of all, we'll have to learn two words. One is stimuli. Already you had used the word response. Now we talk about stimuli and response. Stimulus or response. If I talk about stimulus and response, what is the meaning of this? What is stimulus? What is the meaning of the word stimulus? Stimulus, when I say stimulus, would refer to any external factor or an agent that can trigger or that can allow the plant parts to show some response. So whenever we are talking about the basic meaning of this word stimulus, what it is, what are I supposed to write? Agent or a factor. Agent or a factor that brings about the secretion that brings about the secretion of agent or a factor that brings about the secretion of phytohormones in the plant tissues. Phytohormones in the plant tissues. So what are we understanding here? Then what will be the stimulus? What can be some examples of stimulus that we can write? What are some examples of stimulus now that we can write? For a plant, stimulus would be more temperature. Yes, temperature can be stimulus. Light, temperature, gravity can be stimulus. What else? Water can be stimulus. So now that touch also, remember touch also. So now that we are talking about that, what can generally act as stimulus for a plant? All these factors. Touch, of course, remember. Now we have to learn in detail later that how did I say touch? Of course, one example I gave you about the touch-me-not plant. Apart from that, if you have noticed this type of climbers and creepers, did you ever see the climber and the creeper growing? देखा है कभी? How many of you have got money plants or this type of creeper plants at home? You have? आके ना? हाँ, इसको डर लग रहा है बोलने के लिए because now only I am going to ask her then what is the pattern of growth you observe? If I talk about these type of plants, like say suppose there are so many type of plants like this, not the money plant, and there are many such of this category. If I talk about the cucumber and the gourd and the pumpkin and these type of plants, do they have a strong and a rigid and a firm stem? No. So if I talk about, say suppose I have got 2 plants or 3 plants in my window sill. I have got the tulsi plant, I have got the money plant, and maybe I have got some roses. Can you tell me this observation? I think all of you must be having. What would be the pattern of growth of these 3 plants? The roses comparatively a bigger type of a shrub. No, it's a bigger type of a shrub, where the stems would be rigid, quite broad, no, quite thick. What about the tulsi? Yes. Stems are comparatively narrow, but still they are rigid. Still they are hard. Now, what about the money plant? The stem, is it brown? No, it is green. And is it hard? Is it rigid? No, it is softer. So when I talk about the money plant, does it stand straight or it keeps on swirling and wrapping around the other stem or the grill that it gets? Yes or no? So now that I talk about the stem of the money plant, it always keeps on swirling and turning and twisting and growing. Why? It responds to touch. It responds. So that's also another type of a response to touch that we talk about. You may feel, how does the plant respond to touch? So temperature, light, gravity, water, touch. So these are some of the concepts to understand. And response. Now that we talk about response to the plant, now try to understand the concept of response that the plant show and we show. Animal response and plant responses are absolutely different. Huh? So suppose now, when I talk about responses, can you give me 1 or 2 examples of responses in animals? Responses in animals. Response with reference to a stimulus. Stimulus, यहाँ पे if I have to give examples of animal stimulus, examples कुछ examples यहाँ पे different होगा. Something like if I have to give you examples of animal stimulus, then I should say, हाँ देखो response. उतना demo दिखा दिया मुझे. Very good. So now that I talk about, now the same thing will it happen with the plant? Of course not. So now that we are talking about that plant responses and animal responses are absolutely different. Let us try to understand 1 or 2 examples this way. When I'm talking about animal response, when I talk about an animal response, for an animal response, the stimulus has to be sound. The stimulus has to be light. Light common हो सकता है. But for an animal response, gravity is never a stimulus. Water is never a stimulus, basically. For animal response, sound is a stimulus, light is a stimulus, touch is a stimulus, chemicals is a stimulus, like that. So if I talk about an example of light as a stimulus, strong light, if thrown on your eye, you will start flickering. Plant को कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता. So now that I talk about chemicals, animal temperature is also there. Say suppose you enter your kitchen. Mommy has prepared the best, your favorite dish today. So now after the lecture, when you go home, you smell of your favorite food, and straight away you go to the kitchen and try to open the lid. Mommy, kya banaya aapne? And then it's so hot, and you happen to live it. Temperature is acting as a stimulus, and what is your response? Touching something very hot, and immediately relieving it. But what will be the response of a plant if it senses very high temperature? What will be the response of a plant if it senses very high temperature? It will start drying out. Drying out. Same like that, the reverse. If what will happen to the plant if it starts sensing very cold temperature? Again, leaves falling off and etc. For us, how do we respond to very cold temperature? Shivering. And very high temperature, sweating, etc. etc. So the responses, see here, stimulus is same, but the responses are different. Let me talk about something more. If I talk about light also, generally when I talk about light, the responses for us and the responses for a plant is different. Now in this case, light is the best example to give you this this reference. Then when I talk about light, I already said that the plumule is moving away from the soil towards the light. The shoot of the plant is growing towards the light. So whenever I talk about, for us human, never mind we are exposed to whatever frequencies of light, intensities of light, is there anything related to growth for us? Are we growing in response to light or with reference to light? No. But in most of the cases, if I talk about responses of a plant, remember, responses of a plant is always associated with growth. Responses of a plant is always associated with growth. Kaise? I say that the roots are responding towards water, but it is responding towards water in the process of growth. The shoot is responding towards light, but in that process it is growing. But do we grow and show any response? No. We show our response by various actions like moving our body parts, smiling, screaming, shouting, yelling, etc. etc. So now that we are talking about responses of the plant, maybe for the same stimulus I talk about, it's different. Now we are going to enter into the main parts of the chapter where you will come across that response by a plant is majorly by growth. Response in whatever way you talk about, whichever chemicals you talk about now, response for a plant is majorly by the way of growth in different forms. Majorly by the way of growth. For animal, no, growth is not actually a way of response. Growth is not a way of response, but we have the various other means of responses. So now we try understanding that what are the different types of hormones. So we have been already talking about response. What is the response in case of a plant? What are you going to write? How will we define the word response? What I told you just now. Response. The various methods in which the plant grows. The plant grows. The different modes of growth that the plant show in response to a stimulus. So whenever we are talking about the response for a plant, the various modes of growth, the various modes of growth in reference to the stimulus, So that would be considered as response. Okay. Now we try understanding the various different types of chemical substances. Now that we are talking about the chemical substances, there are 5 different categories. So now I say phytohormones. How can we categorize them? Let us see. Phytohormones. These phytohormones can be studied under three categories. These phytohormones can be studied under three categories. What are the three categories? There are some type of phytohormones which are growth stimulators, growth activators. There are some which are growth inhibitors. You know what is the meaning of inhibitor and stimulator? And there are some which is just a mixture. In certain cases, it is helping in stimulating growth, activating growth, and in certain cases, inhibiting growth. So let us write down. What are the different categories of phytohormones? The different categories are, one category is a growth stimulator, growth activator. Another one is a growth inhibitor. And next is stimulator and inhibitor, both. So it's a mixed category that we are talking about. Meaning, in certain cases it will act as a stimulator, and in certain cases it will act as a inhibitor. Now, next is, let us talk about growth promoter. They have used the word promoter in your book, so you can write this word also. Growth promoter, growth promoter or stimulator. One is the oxygen, cytokinin. Keep this book for 1 minute. So let us now classify them first. Let us classify them. What are some of the examples? If I have to talk about the examples, the first is oxygen. Next is cytokinin. Third is gibberellins. Inhibitor, growth inhibitor, basically abscisic acid. And both, if I have to talk about ethylene. Okay, so 5 hormones you are going to study as per your syllabus, and basically plans have got major 5 only. Additional, there are just modifications of these only. Some another few varieties are there, which are modifications of these. So which are the 5 hormones we are going to study now? Oxygen, cytokinin, gibberellins, abscisic acid, and ethylene. Okay. Oxygen, cytokinin, gibberellins, abscisic acid, and ethylene. Now let us learn the specialized functions of oxygen. We start with the first one. We start with the first phytohormone, oxygen. The first phytohormone is oxygen. Oxygen, the word oxygen again is associated with the word oxygen, if you have to understand. Remember this. When we are talking about the word oxygen, it is associated with the word oxygen, which refers to growth. A-U-X-E-I-N. Remember this, which refers to the process of growth. Oxygen is derived from the word oxygen, which means growth. This you are asked sometimes. This word you have to remember. Oxygen is derived from which word? It is derived from the word oxygen, which refers to growth. Now, what are the functions? You'll have to take those functions in your book as I explained you. for every particular hormone, some basic 4 to 5 functions. You have a book. For every particular hormone, now you have to remember some basic functions. Minimum 3 to 4 functions you have to remember. So I'm taking from your book only, since most of you have this book here. So the first is when we are talking about the basic functions. Now, when we are talking about oxygen, some extra portions are there in your syllabus also, but never mind, I'll just go through this fast. When we are talking about oxygen, remember in most of these hormones, you will come across a concept written natural hormones and synthetic hormones. Now, what is the meaning of natural? What are the plant tissue normally produces? Synthetic, most of these chemical substances can also be prepared artificially. So that's the meaning of synthetic. So that's a simple concept to understand. Actually, whenever we are talking about this entire field of agriculture, horticulture, this type of chemical substances are always been prepared artificially and introduced. A very simple example, if I give you, all these crops today that we get. Say suppose I talk about the brinjal, or if I talk about the pumpkin, or if I talk about the guavas. The guava today, the size of the guava is big, no, quite big. Today we get a guava that's this big also in size. हाँ कि नहीं? तन्मय तुम्हारे सैंपल में मिलता है कि नहीं? इतना बड़ा guava मिलता है? हाँ. But no, actually the size of guava is not that big. If I talk about the original variety of the guava, guavas are supposed to be a small sized fruit, almost the size of an apple. Maybe in another 5 years time we'll get apples also this big. Because with the help of hormones, anything is possible. So if I talk about the brinjal, the original brinjals are quite narrow. But today you see, if you hit your head with that brinjal, you need to be hospitalized. Such big brinjal we get nowadays, like huge ones. So now that we are talking about with the help of these hormones, see suppose these raw mangoes which are prematurely been harvested out, and then they have been ripened with the help of these hormones. So all these different type of changes have been done in the field of agriculture, horticulture. If I talk about the flowers also, flowers. See, naturally, whenever we talk about those flower gardens, it's not so easy to grow such huge amount of these flowers. But see, today we talk about flowers. First thing, the flowers are easily available all throughout the season. No? So some flowers which are not seasonal also, we get them all throughout the year. And on top of that, such a huge quantity. Think about the normal conditions. If I tell you, now that Dashera and Ganpati time, today ever see the market full, huge quantities of flowers. So for the production, is it possible naturally? Is the soil that much fertile to give a huge production of the flower, and that also in a short period of time? No, with the help of hormones they do it. With the help of fertilizers and hormones they do it. So the growth is faster and the flowers are bigger, remarkable, all this. So straight away move on to the first function of oxygen. What is the first function of oxygen? We talk about cell elongation. The first function of oxygen is cell elongation. What is the meaning of cell elongation? When we are talking about the major function of oxygen, is cell elongation. When we understand the plant cells, which are majorly made up of what? Cellulose. The plant cells are majorly made up of cellulose. And this cellulosic cell wall can be stretched to a great extent. The cellulosic cell wall. For an example, I may understand that a particular tissue is supposed to have only this size cells. Any particular type of a tissue of a plant. But with the introduction of the hormones, the cell length can be increased quite a lot. With the introduction of the hormones, the cell length can be introduced. So this particular hormone majorly acts on the cell wall and brings about growth. But how? Brings about growth by rapid cell division? No, by cell elongation. Remember, this is how you get questions in your paper. Oxygens bring about growth in which pattern? The pattern of growth that the oxygen is referring to. Oxygen refers to growth by cell elongation. Oxygen, underline that sentence. Oxygen refers to growth. Oxygen promotes elongation and growth of stem and root. Underline that sentence. In this chapter, you have to read all the lines important, underline and remember them. Then, so when we are talking about, see, there are some examples that the stem elongation requires larger amount of oxygen, flower requires larger amount of oxygen concentration for them, and then many fruits to reach the optimum size, and that also in a shorter period of time, and quite a number of them to make them commercially attractive. Again, a larger concentration of oxygen. So naturally, normally also if I talk about, normally when during the, now say suppose in case of human also we say, that when the child is in the growth period, the child should get adequate amount of nutritive food. Same like that, when the plant is in the process of growth and when the leaves and the flowers and the fruits are in the process of growth, the oxygen concentration in the plant should be adequate. If the oxygen concentration is less, then the plant becomes stunted and the adequate amount of fruiting flowering does not occur. Take the next point, apical dominance. Apical dominance. The apical bud growth and lower axillary bud are suppressed. Apical dominance. Now, what is the meaning of apical dominance? Apical dominance means what? When we are talking about any particular plant when they grow, apical dominance means I talk about a young sapling, and this sapling is in the process of growth. This sapling is in the process of growth. So now, first of all, we are going to come across, if at all you also have noticed a young sapling grow. This sapling would first of all grow, or the stem would grow for a particular length first. Did you ever observe that if it is a young plant, do we have enough number of leaves in the lower region of the stem? Generally not. Generally not. So, pehle to, the stem will grow till a particular height and then it will start giving rise to leaves. So, this particular region is more or less barren. Now that it has already reached to a particular height, then the leaves start growing. But as and when it is growing, if you constantly keep on cutting and cutting the upper regions, then at a lower height, it starts branching. That means when the young plant was growing, what did I do every time is, just a leaf has come, so I just cut it. Or now that the young leaf has, the stem is growing, I just cut it. So as and when it is growing, I just cut the upper part, I just cut the upper part, I just cut the upper part. Then slowly after some point it will start branching. It will start branching. But normally what is the feature of a plant? Normally, the plant starts growing till a particular height and then it starts branching. But say suppose in the gardens and in the farmlands, what happens? What would the farmer do or the agriculturist do? They would always cut the upper part, because they don't want those barren tall plants. They want plants which are more bushy. They want plants which are more branching. So to make a plant more branching, this has to be cut out. So here we are now talking about what is the natural feature. Natural feature is oxygen brings about apical dominance. What is the meaning of apical dominance? Apical dominance means every time a new bud starts growing, this is a new bud. A new bud starts growing, which will keep on moving vertically up. Do you generally come across a lateral bud? This is called a lateral bud. Lateral bud. When a young plant grows, do we ever come across lots of lateral buds growing? No. We only come across young buds growing on the top and the plant grows. Just one or two leaves, and the stem is maximally growing. That is called apical dominance. Underline that sentence. Removal of apical buds results in the growth of lower buds, lateral buds. That's what I told you right now. Removal of apical buds results in the growth of lateral or lower buds. Next is apical dominance. You are also asked as a definition. Define apical dominance. What are you supposed to write as a definition? Define apical dominance. Write down in your notebook. Apical dominance. How to define that? That's a very good common question. In the definition section it comes. Fill in the blank section it comes. Define apical dominance. The phenomenon, N-O-N, the phenomenon in which the phenomenon in which the apical bud grows, inhibiting, the apical bud grows fast. The apical bud grows, inhibiting the growth of lateral buds. Inhibiting the growth of lateral buds. Inhibiting the growth of lateral buds is known as apical dominance. Is known as apical dominance. Is known as apical dominance. Okay. Now, next is when we are talking about effects of auction. What is the third point given in Selena check? What is the first point?
Promote growth of stem growth.
Promote
Growth of stem by stem elongation.
Promote growth of stem elongation is the same point. Here extra points are given. Read out the third.
Word the apical dominance. Apical dominance.
Apical dominance. देखा ना बोलो. Only the 5 most important points you study. The 5 most important points. So यहाँ पे the first point is this. Then next is, okay, this is very important now. Third, delays leaf senescence. Delays leaf senescence. Delays leaf senescence. Now, what is the meaning of this? Delays leaf senescence. You take down these points, some extra points are there in your book that you may just go through if you want, but not that very seriously that you have to remember. So the first I said is apical dominance. Second is, we'll talk about this. Next is, third point is delays leaf senescence. Delays leaf senescence. That's not necessary. Delays leaf senescence. What is the meaning of senescence? Senescence means a process of aging. What is senescence? A process of aging. Say suppose in a common feature for a plant, would be that the stem is growing, the branches, the leaves, and the leaves after a particular period of time in certain plants, after a particular period of time, the leaves may start getting yellow, the leaves may start aging, and the leaves will start falling off. So if the oxygen concentration is there in the plant in adequate amount, then the senescence of the leaf would be delayed. The falling and the aging of the leaf would be delayed. So this is another important that you have to remember, another point. Then, okay, this is the same thing. Induces rooting. Okay, this we have to take it important. Induces rooting of cut out stems. Example, rose. Or other different plants like bougainvillea also. Now, these are all very different concepts that you are learning. Now, if I talk about inducing rooting, what is the meaning of inducing rooting? I talk about, say suppose now I get to see a good variety of rose plants and I want them in my house. So what do? I take some stem cutting. So that stem cutting has to be of a definite. क्या हो रहा है? सब कुछ गिर क्यों जाता है? So much of gravitational pull that's right, Now I really don't understand why students के साथ ये gravitational pull इतना ज़्यादा क्यों act होता है? Ramesh, I see the same with my daughter. Every minute, every second, the eraser and the pencil, everything is falling down. ऐसा क्यों? हमारा तो कुछ गिरता नहीं कभी भी. The pen is remaining as it is on the table for hours. That means my daughter is going to remain the same till 10th standard, so I have to be mentally prepared. Essa, she also tells us the same. It was here only how it fell down, I don't know. So better be mentally prepared. Now, inducing rooting of cutout stems. Now, inducing rooting of cutout stems. Did you see your mothers also like this? 10 strawberries? No. Tanmay, no. Tanmay's mother is always tense. Your mothers are cool? Very cool, no? Nice children. So now that we are talking about rooting of stems, what I said, I talk about cut out of a root. Okay, cut out of a root. Now this root I want to plant it in the soil. I want it in my flower tub. So what I have to do, I have to put this root cutting a definite length, and I have to put it in the soil with all normal conditions. The soil should be having adequate amount of water, nutrients, etc., etc. But at the same time, if within few days, meaning within a period of days, within a period of some couple of days, within a period of some couple of, Prashanta is holding tight, we are the midnight baby. So now that we are talking about it, within a couple of days, the roots should come up. Otherwise, the stem will die within the next few more days. No? So within a few days, couple of days ke under, the roots should come up. You know why? The roots will come up, then only the supply of the water will start, and then only the stem will remain alive. So within few days, meaning 3-4 days, tak agar roots aayega nahi, then the upper part of the stem will start drying out, and it will die. So now here we are trying to come across that ये जो root induction है in the cutout portion of the root, that also is because of oxygen. If in the cells adequate amount of oxygen is there, then only the production of the root will be faster. So by mistake, say suppose I have cut out a portion of a stem from a plant which already has got a deficiency of oxygen, then the roots are not coming up. So that's the reason quite a number of times we see also that if I take a cutout portion, so now cutout portion of the stem we take up from a plant and then we put it in the soil. But after a week also we get to see that nothing has developed, because within a week a fresh leaf should grow. Within a week a fresh leaf should grow. But within a week nothing has come up, and slowly we see that the stem is dying out. Remember this point. Induces root production, root formation. What else? Induces fruit formation. That's the fifth point. These are all important points that you have to remember for oxygen. Induces fruit formation. Induces fruit formation. So fruit formation, when we are talking about a plant which has adequate amount of oxygen concentration in the cells, the fruit formation will not be delayed. Quite a number we say that during the season, every particular fruit forms in a particular season. The season is over, but the plant did not give rise to any adequate amount of mangoes or apples or etc. Why? Because oxygen concentration must be much lesser, deficient in that plant. So if the oxygen concentration is deficient, the plant will never give rise to adequate amount of fruits. Induce fruit formation, and basically without fertilization. Now here, as it is, you come across a specific word, and this is known as parthenocarpy. Remember this word, parthenocarpy. What are some examples? Let us write some examples here. Banana, very, very common example to remember. Apples, very, very common example. So here you will also be asked about this. What is parthenocarpy? Formation of fruits without fertilization. Do you remember the process of fertilization? The last year's syllabus you had already studied, no? Fertilization. Do you remember? How does the fertilization happen in the plant? क्या है वो process का नाम क्या है? Pollination नहीं होता. Pollination के बाद है ना fertilization. वो process का नाम क्या है? What is the name of the process which happens in a plant which gives rise to a seed and a fruit? What is the name of the process? देखो online. यही online का effect. What was the name of the process? किसी को याद नहीं? नहीं? किसी को याद नहीं है? In the flower, what is the process which happens which gives rise to the seed and the fruit? Double fertilization. Double fertilization. वो भी याद नहीं है? You have studied कि नहीं? पढ़ा ही नहीं था वो chapter. Double fertilization. Polar, no, the pollen grain, the two male gametes come by the way of the pollen tube and enter into the ovule. So एक step fertilization में zygote बनता है, दूसरे step fusion में endosperm बनता है. Do you remember that process? So वो कितना detailed process है? That's a detailed process that you have actually studied. So in that detailed process, the seed is formed. But here, if the oxygen concentration is there adequate, then in many such plants, without process of fertilization, fruits can be formed. Right on the next question. Define parthenocarpy. Define parthenocarpy. Give an example or give two examples of plants showing the process. Fast, not have time to finish. Two examples of plants showing such process. Parthenocarpy. The process of formation of fruits. Process of formation of fruits. Process of formation of fruits without fertilization. Process of formation of fruits without fertilization is known as parthenocarpy. Process of formation of fruits without fertilization. Process of formation of fruits without fertilization is known as parthenocarpy. Example: apples, tomatoes, banana. Also, I gave you any two you write. Okay. Some additional points that you have in your book is about the weed control and the control of the abscission layer. That is not very an important point, so you may leave those 2 points. Next is we talk about another growth promoter. Now that is gibberellins. We talk about another growth promoter. The second hormone. What is the second hormone that we talk about is gibberellins. Gibberellins. Now let us talk about this. Gibberellins. Now, when we are talking about the functions of gibberellins, so gibberellins actually it is the chemical complement. So now you already understand what are these chemical substances known as in one word. What are these substances? Chemical substances. What are they known in one word? What will you say? What are they? Phytohormones. Phytohormones. So now we are talking about gibberellins. Gibberellins. There are, since it's a chemical component, there are various forms of a chemical component. No? There can be various forms. In chemistry also you must have studied about that. A particular chemical compound may exist in various forms. So when we are talking about, same here, for gibberellins also there are various forms of gibberellins. Let us try to understand which are some of the most common ones. We talk about GA1, GA2, GA3. Why do we write GA? Gibberellic acid. It is also known as gibberellic acid or gibberellins. It can be also termed as gibberellic acid or gibberellins. That's why we are writing it as GA, gibberellic acid or GA. So there are various forms: GA1, GA2, GA3, and GA3 is the most frequently occurring form. Underline that in your book. It must be written somewhere. It's written fine. It must be written in there. GA3 is the most commonly occurring form. GA3 is the most. See there in your book is there. Is the most commonly occurring form. Most frequently occurring form is GA3. Write it down. The most commonly occurring form is GA3. Now, for GA3 also we are going to study. There will be some common functions that GA3 will perform in a plant. But whatever it is, since we are talking about GA3 as a promoter or an inhibitor, promoter, then obviously it should also help in the process of fruiting, stem elongation, but in a different manner. We'll talk about this. We'll start again from here the next class. This is useful.
नहीं करना
क्या
मतलब क्या हो जाएगा